Hello and welcome to this EIFL's webinar with Professor Stephen Curry, who is Assistant Provost for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at Imperial College London. And he's also chair of the Declaration on Research Assessment, or Dora for short. And Dr. Buhle Mbambo-Thata from the National University of Lesotho, University Librarian, and she has also worked in universities in South Africa. She graduated from University of Botswana, so she'll bring South African perspective. And as always in our webinars, please use a Q&A for your questions, because we hope that it will be a conversation with everyone attending today. You could also raise your hand if you want to speak and ask a question, because we're not many today, and we'll make slides and recording available. So thanks a lot, and over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Irina, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this very international meeting. So I want to talk for hopefully 20-25 minutes and tell you a little bit about how Imperial College came to sign Dora and how we have gone about implementing it. And I would say that as with every university, that's still a work in progress. And also in the latter half, talk a little bit about some of the broader issues and about where Dora is right now and what it's doing, because I'm obviously heavily involved in that as well. So how did Imperial come to sign Dora? It's quite a long story. I had been agitating for it for quite some time on my blog, Reciprocal Space. I had been writing about the sort of negative impacts of the widespread misuse of impact factors in research assessment, and had then, on the basis of that, spoken to our Provost, Professor James Sterling at the time, who was sympathetic, but encouraged me then to go around and talk to all the different faculties to try and get them on board. And I had mixed success, I have to say, in doing that, partly because I guess they didn't really know who I was. And I think it does require a certain degree of institutional leadership in order to really sort of drive this kind of institutional change. But I did have, in more recent years, very senior allies. So Chris Banks, who's our Director of Library Services and a great advocate, both of open scholarship, but also of Dora and its value to changing mindsets on research assessment. And then about 5 years ago, we recruited a new Vice Provost for Research, Nick Jennings, who was, again, a strong proponent of open science and of Dora. Actually, ultimately, it was Nick who helped to sort of knock heads together. And Nick and Chris and I worked together. And alongside Chris Jackson as well, who was also a fellow academic in Earth Sciences, who's very keen on, seeing Imperial sort of take up the Dora mantle, and was a fellow agitator with me. But with the help of Nick, who had a seat at the top table, eventually then Imperial signed in 2017. Now, there is another sort of perspective to this story, which is that Imperial's use of metrics in research assessment had led to a very tragic event in 2014, when a professor in the Faculty of Medicine took his own life. And while one can never be entirely sure what someone in such an extreme situation is thinking, I think it's fairly clear that it was the pressures of expectations around grant income, particularly, I think, that had led him to that extreme action. This event, of course, led to quite a number of investigations, one of which then was a review of the use of performance metrics at Imperial College. So the Faculty of Medicine had a very specific approach to this, which was a very, very metric driven. It was driven by grant income and by journal impact factors. And that was done away with. And we did introduce this notion of performance profiles, which was an attempt to sort of recognize the broad array of activities that academics at Imperial engage in. So, their research, obviously, we are very keen that our people are doing really good, high quality research that's impactful in the world. but we also care about their teaching, and we want to make sure that we are very explicitly rewarding those sorts of efforts, and then additional work that they might undertake, whether it's policy development or public engagement, but also service to the department, because I think you obviously need that for the university to thrive. We did consider, and I was part of this review group, we did consider pushing the college to sign Dora, but this was in December 2015. But there wasn't universal support back then. But as I say, when Nick Jennings came on board, we then managed to sort of drag the university over the line. Although drag is probably the wrong word. I mean, I think people did recognize the value of this. And so there was, the decision was taken at the very highest level at Provost board. And now then there was the task of trying to implement it. So the college signed in January 2017 and set up a working group and to figure out, well, what does this mean for the college? What are we going to have to change in terms of our processes and the way that we advertise for jobs? And so whereas previously we would often talk about, a record of publication in world-leading journals, which of course is a signal for high impact factor journals, we now talk about wanting to recruit people who do high quality research. So again, it's a Dora compliant focus on the quality of the research. So this working group met through 2017, produced a report, which is available here, and I'm very happy to share my slides with Irina and she can distribute them. So you don't have to worry about writing down all the links if you want to follow up. And so it was about changing the language and thinking about some of the ways that we do our processes. Some of them were already quite compliant, which was, for example, focusing on people's what they thought were their best 4 papers when it came to assessing promotion, for example. We already had that practice. And then one other thing that we did was to start telling our community about what it meant, because I think a university signing up to Dora can cause a great deal of uncertainty and anxiety among staff who felt that they already knew the rules of the game and are wondering, therefore, what are the new rules of the game. So we had a workshop, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But we also are very clear to recognize that getting into full Dora compliance is going to that represents a culture change within the institution, and that is really going to take time. But the workshop we ran in September 2019, and it was advertised internally so people could turn up, but we also live streamed it as well and we invited people from outside the college, like Lizzie Gadd from the University of Loughborough. And opened it up so that it hopefully was then also a national event as well, and to spread the word. It was, we had a very good discussion. The whole proceedings are on YouTube for anyone to follow along. And again, that was, very much part of trying to communicate a change in direction in the way that we are assessing research, and hopefully then a change for the better that people can get on board with. Sort of further progress then has been a little bit hampered by COVID. We had plans in March 2020 for another workshop on open science and rethinking research assessment as well. But unfortunately that came a cropper or was abandoned when COVID-19 came along. And we've had a very busy year adjusting the whole university to dealing with the pandemic, but we're now sort of thinking how to reignite that. But in the meantime, there have been many wider cultural shifts, both at Imperial College, but across the higher education sector as a whole. We certainly detect this in the United Kingdom. So we are coming under increasing pressure, and I think it's right that we should do so, particularly from funding agencies, to be thinking about aspects of our research culture. And this intersects very much with the way that one goes about research assessment, because both are rooted in the values of the academy and the values of the institution. And so Nick, who's been very proactive on this, has been leading work where we are then helping our community to understand what that means, and also then to respond to requests from funders, and increasingly applications for funding in the UK. There will be sections on the form that ask about the culture of of the university, how one goes about recruiting diverse PhD students, for example, or postdocs, and thinking about the way that their careers are nurtured, and thinking about the activities and the skills that they developed that are valued. And Dora, we would certainly see recognition of mentorship and good training practice as one of the key aspects of research assessment, because one of the key products of research is high quality researchers. It's not just about papers and not just about grants. At the same time, we've had increased attention to issues of equality, diversity, and inclusion, and I have a very sort of central role in that at the university, which increasingly intersects with our practices around research assessment. And we are sort of rethinking the way that we work together as academics and professionals within the university setting. We're not quite all the way there yet, I would say, with regard to our approach to metrics. You'll find on the college website a page that's devoted to league tables, which simply lists our various rankings in the various different league tables. And to my mind, I would like to see a very strong health warning placed on this, hopefully stating that we see our position in league tables as a byproduct of our general efforts to do world-class research, high quality, and offer high quality educations, and create a very positive working culture where everybody, staff and students, can thrive. And that's an argument in process, shall we say, from my point of view. But the thinking about the place that assessment, which is obviously judging competitions, and the place of the harms that excessive and hyper competition have brought to the academy over the last 10 or 20 years. We've certainly seen and felt it in the UK, but I think it's very much a worldwide phenomenon. And I know from talking to colleagues in the Global South, for example, that they are often sort of put under pressure to perform on the international stage according to the standards that seem to now to be defined by those who would rank and tabulate different universities. And I think as a community, we want to try and pull away from that. And this is, again, a marker of, again, a funder's perspective. This is Jeremy Farrer, who's the director of the Wellcome Trust, recognizing the damage that hypercompetition is doing to research culture, creates toxic power dynamics, which we have, poor leadership behavior. And if there is too much of a focus on the products of research, on getting the big papers or getting the big grants, and not enough on the people, then we are creating a working environment that increasingly people are finding difficult to cope with, and it's leading to issues with mental health. And we at Dora have, recognized that, and we sort of articulated our thoughts on that, and our general approach to the reform of research assessment within the wider academic landscape, and in particularly thinking about the interactions between research assessment practices and other important developments that are going on. One, the drive towards open scholarship, and then the other, the increasing attention that's being paid to equity and inclusion in the academy. And so these things, they interact in complex ways. I'm not going to talk about this in detail this morning, since I don't have the time. But ultimately, these do lead us to ask, important questions that have perhaps been neglected for too long, but ultimately lead, I think, to a focus on the importance of our research culture, which means thinking about the people, both inside the academy and outside the academy, so the people who are working in it, but then the people also who are served by it, and are we serving all our populations equally? And then the values that we bring to that, and how much those values perhaps can be distorted by focuses on outputs or focuses on metrics. And so ideally, of course, we would have people and values at very much the center of our operations. And for many people, that is the case. And I think in many universities, that is the sort of mission or the aspirational goal. But of course, we live in the real world, and the real world has many complicating factors. We know that universities are under financial and time pressure. Increasingly, certainly since the Second World War, since governments have been investing more and more in research, they're demanding greater and greater accountability. And the ways that they do that do sometimes cause harms if we're relying over much on metrics or league tables, thinking too much about running research through sort of free market philosophies, or just using competition to try and decide who is the best or what's the best way to proceed. And mixed in with all that also then is the idea of the sort of lone genius researcher, when increasingly I think many of us recognize that success at research depends on collaboration, depends on teamwork, even if it's just at the research group level, but increasingly, of course, it's between departments within universities, or between groups in different departments within universities, and between groups in different parts of the country, or in different countries in different parts of the world. And there hasn't been enough of an accent on that. So let me just give you a brief update on where we are with Dora. I hope most of this audience is already familiar with Dora, the declaration. We are best known, I think, for our caution that the journal impact factor should not be used as a surrogate measure of the quality of research. But I think what is less known is that the declaration as a whole, which you can read from this web link here, actually has 17 positive recommendations for different stakeholders. So for institutions, for example, universities and research institutes, it's about being explicit about the criteria that are used to assess researchers and assess research, and placing an emphasis on the content of a paper. And then also, for the purposes of research assessment, thinking more broadly about the qualities and the activities that we value across the board. So thinking about a broad range of impact measures, including influence on policy and practice, but also, the value of data sets and sharing software. And as I said earlier, the value that comes with, doing a really good job of training the next generation of researchers. So Dora is also an organization, very small organization. This is our website. We initially launched in 2013, but in 2017, we managed to attract a sort of significant tranche of funding. And these are currently the member organizations that offer us either financial support or support in kind. And that support has allowed us to hire 1.2 members of staff. Prior to 2017, we had no permanent or paid staff. It was all done voluntarily. And we've also have an international steering group, and we've created a global advisory board who are all volunteers. But we were very deliberate in creating our advisory board to make sure that we looked around the world in order to get representatives and voices from every continent on the planet, because we recognize that reform of research assessment has to be a coordinated and worldwide endeavor if it is to succeed, because the pressures that academics are under, there will be local variations, of course, but many of them are shared experiences. And certainly one of the powerful messages we've heard from our advisory board members from the Global South is the frustration they feel at having to play a game that the rules of which have been sort of created in the Global North without thinking about their interests. So we have a sort of small, tightly defined set of priorities, although we are this year looking to sort of revise and renew these, but our goals are to recruit more signatories to help promote the declaration and the things that it does, to extend the global and disciplinary impact of Dora. It was initially very much rooted in the sciences, but the issues that we're addressing in research assessment apply to all disciplines, and to develop and promote best practice. And this is the area where we have been much more active since 2017, organizing meetings, running workshops within scholarly meetings. This EIFL paper summarizes the sort of findings and of a meeting that we held jointly with the HHMI in 2019 to look at how one identifies and overcomes institutional barriers to cultural change and outlines a framework for action. And there are many more resources available on the Dora website. Among them, we've produced these sort of briefing documents, thinking about myths about evaluation, and then also actually very specifically trying to tackle unintended biases that occur within research assessment processes, which still exclude too many people And in the UK, we know that women are severely underrepresented, and people from ethnic minorities, for example, are still severely underrepresented in many disciplines. We're a small organization, but we can extend our influence by collaborating with other bodies. Of course, Dora is not the only organization thinking and working on reform of research assessment around the world. Many others are. The Royal Society developed this resume for researchers, and so this is like a narrative CV. So it's a concise CV, modular in construction. But what it does is, rather than asking applicants for jobs or for funding to just provide their standard CV, often which would be littered with impact factors, they asked very specific questions, and there is a word limit on the answers so that we get a concise, structured narrative in which candidates can describe, the value and the importance of their particular contributions, either to research, to the development of individuals, to the development of their discipline and the community, and maybe their impact then on the world. And so this is providing an alternative tool to facilitate research assessment. One of the criticisms we hear a lot that is, if you don't use impact factors, what are you going to do instead? You can't expect everybody to read every applicant's papers from start to finish. And that's true. Academics are very busy people. And that is why Dora has placed an emphasis on trying to help develop and promote alternative tools. And the narrative CV is one, and has been taken up by quite a number of funders, certainly within Europe. And we've collaborated with the Wellcome Trust to develop their open access policies. We are very keen to share good practice, and so we've recently revamped our resource library. And so this is a tremendous sort of collection, curated collection of good practice examples from around the world that I would recommend to you. And one other particular resource that we have developed are these case studies. And these are, we've sort of worked with a number of different institutions. We have 10 or 11 of these already. And so these are institutions that have actually made steps to reform their practice. And so we have interviewed them and then written up a case study outlining the steps that they took, the barriers that they encountered, and how they overcame them. And hoping, working with the philosophy that nothing succeeds like success. So if you have an institution that has successfully implemented them, then there's no need to reinvent the wheel. You can learn from each other. And finally, of course, globally, and this is a global meeting, there is a much broader movement towards rethinking research assessment. And Dora, along with many others, was part of a meeting of the Global Research Council, which was jointly organized by UKRI, the UK Research and Innovation in the United Kingdom, and the National Research Foundation in South Africa. This was supposed initially to take place in Durban, but it took place online last year. And this working paper, which Dora helped to co-author, outlines sort of the state of the art with regard to the role of funders in driving good practice in research assessment, what we call responsible research assessment. And this has been very well received at the Global Research Council, and hopefully will lead to greater coherence and greater uptake of responsible research practices, which are very much in the same spirit as Dora across the world. So I'm very happy to take questions on that, perhaps now or perhaps after the next presentation. But thank you very much for your attention, and I will stop sharing.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. That was excellent, and thank you for your leadership on this. I suggest that we listen to Buhle's talk, and then we'll take questions and have a conversation. So over to you, Buhle, now.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Irina, for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. And Stephen, it's really been refreshing listening to you, because Dora represents a lot of hope for many of us in really impacting and changing the research assessment culture and giving it a heart. And I will not talk about what research assessment is, because we all know. But I will talk about what happens in Lesotho and also what happens in South Africa a little bit, because I've got experience in both countries. And what prevails in Lesotho?
I'm sorry, Buhle, you're not sharing your slides yet, sir.
Not sure what I did there.
Then maybe I can share them for you. Oh,
no,
yeah. So perhaps click on the presentation mode. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Apologies, I was on the run. And I will not talk a lot about the research assessment because we all know what it is. But I will go on to speak about what prevails in Lesotho. And as you know, that in academic institutions, progression, promotion from lecturer to professor depends on some of the stuff that Stephen has talked about, but assessment of publications, assessment of your performance in the bibliometrics, your publication in high impact journals. We still look at that. We use all the lists that are available. Assessment through peer review, sorry, apologies for that typo, through peer review, publication in peer review journals. So we are still using the model that the world uses. Like all universities in the South, we want to do it in the way that it is done overseas and done in the West, because we are looking at performing at the international stage, whether that helps us locally or not, but our aspirations tend to be those that are overseas. And increasingly, institutions on the South are asking, wait a minute, is this really good for us? So at the University of Lesotho, we've started adopting some open access public practices, although it's elementary, so people are increasingly accepting publishing in open access journals. But as you know, the notion of APCs is affecting the researchers that might have pockets that are not so deep, and because the fees can be high. In South Africa, the assessment criteria differs from the Lesotho in that it's in several tiers. So you are assessed first by an institution for promotion from lecturer to senior lecturer to professor. And that often uses your publication in high impact journals, publication in the lists that are approved by the Department of Higher Education. Secondly, also you're assessed by the National Research Foundation or the National Research Fund for rating. So from moving from a Y-class researcher to an A-class researcher, and depending on the citation, the bibliometrics, and how you as a researcher are performing on a scale. And of course, promotion does look at whether you're an A-class researcher or a C-class researcher or not rated at all. And a third process of being assessed is by the Department of Higher Education for subsidy. And so in South Africa, if you publish a journal, you get a subsidy. And that is determined on whether you've published in high impact journals. And so in those three criteria, it touches not only your progression, it touches your access to funding, it touches your access to resources and income as an individual, and it touches on your well-being as a scholar. And as Stephen said, it puts a lot of pressure on scholars because they really have no control or no contribution towards how they are assessed, but it is a standard and they must adhere to these three different forms. Fortunately, the DHET lists also include publication in Dora listed journals, as well as in Cielo listed journals. And a number of us were happy when that came on, because it says we're not just looking at these high impact commercial privatized journals that often keep things under digital law. So as I've indicated that all these three ways of assessment do speak to how a researcher progresses. So if you're applying for promotion, it matters whether you are an A-class researcher or not rated. If you're looking for funding, it counts. It counts whether you're a rated researcher or not. And of course, your promotion also speaks to where you publish. So obviously, while there are standards, there are issues and chasms and things that are making people uncomfortable. Increasingly in Lesotho, for example, academics and scholars are beginning to ask, these metrics that we look at, and speaking only to high impact journals, how does that speak to research that addresses Lesotho's problems, that addresses issues relating to Lesotho and that need to be solved in the country? People are beginning to ask, in assessing people for progress, why do we keep only looking at high impact journals and we do not look at the relevance to the community in which people are working? Finding research on water problems that needs solution, finding research on HIV and AIDS and COVID that speaks to local conditions. So in the progression of academics, what value do we add? And I'm pleased to see that Dora does address that in module 4 as it speaks to impact that changes your community. Also, for many of us from the global state, to what extent should we really be thinking about research assessment that addresses issues of a global state? We can't just keep focusing on blue sky research and academic progression that doesn't address developmental needs and the development state in which most of our countries in the global south speak. Another dimension is, should single university in a country or small country universities of the Caribbean or some of the small island nations, ourselves in Lesotho, Swaziland, should we really be seeking at world rankings as a priority? Or should we be looking for other ways of demonstrating impact and being assessed on those matters and not focusing on things that perhaps speak to bigger universities and don't really speak to our countries and our nations and national needs? And for me, the excitement about Dora, and also that people of the global south, and I was pleased to see quite a number of them on the advisory committee, that they would be the conscience of Dora and keep ensuring that Dora speaks to the socio-economic impact research for the global south. While a number of universities have signed in South Africa, for example, signed Dora, we're hoping that more will join Dora, but specifically to be able to be a conscience that keeps Dora mindful of that there is a world besides the West. So in thinking about a way forward and how can we ensure that Dora gets broader, but that research assessment speaks to a broader issues than the traditional high impact, and that we find ways of making research assessment less stressful, but speaking to a whole person. I think other ways of assessing research impact should be used for progression. Module 4 that Stephen referred to in Dora is one that we are considering at the University of Lesotho, that if people are producing research that changes lives of Lesotho, that ought to be considered in their progression. We should not only be counting beans, as it were, that they've published in high impact journals, but if they've changed the lives of Lesotho, that should be recognized in the progression criteria. Publication in open access journals to be encouraged. I know that in many countries, the open access journals have been looked down upon, and those of us who are active in the open science and open access space should really be trying to work to ensure that those journals make it into Dora and into other lists that are recognized, and so that people's ideological contributions are recognized in their progression. I think also we should consider that those things that hinder participation of the Global South and small states like ours in the open science and open access space, where high APC fees are excluding researchers from the South, we ought to find other ways. I'm glad EIFL does a lot of work in finding reductions for people to publish in journals, reduction in APC fees, but a lot more needs to be done so that the hope that we all had at the beginning of APC doesn't get killed. The hope that eventually there'll be egalitarianism, voices of the South will be heard, that they are not actually deterred or removed by the cost of publishing. And finally, that a different basket of research assessment tools need to be considered. And a number of those modules in Dora speak to them. And I think that when we are advocating for Dora, we should really look at those and see whether they speak to the issues that we are raising in the Global South and in the small states, and see that really, does Dora speak to those? Does it help us to look at more than just counting the high impact, but it looks at the whole person, the whole being, the values, and make sure that people are assessed on things that are relevant to their society as well, to their well-being, and they're changing the profession or changing the country. So thank you for the opportunity to share my views. I was short because I was really just commenting on some of what Stephen has shared. Thank you. Thank you, Irina.
Thanks a lot, Buhle. That was very powerful. So now it's time for questions, sir. And please, colleagues, sir, either type them in a Q&A or raise your hand, and I'll let you speak, because we're not a big group today, so I think everyone can also talk. And I don't see any questions yet, and maybe I can ask mine. Teresa Theodosia has a question, so let me promote Theodosia to a panelist. She's from Ghana, and she'll introduce herself. Welcome, Theodosia. Please unmute yourself and introduce and ask your question or comment.
Yes, thank you very much to you, the two presenters. This has been very, very insightful and encouraging, because I think what you're talking about is not different from our part of the world, in our part of the world. But my question is to Buhle. I'd like to find out, am I right in saying that you were introduced as a university librarian? Is that right? Yeah. I'd like to find out how you have promoted open science, research assessment, different ways of assessing research, not only for your library staff, but for the whole university. What role have you played in this? Thank you.
Should I go ahead and answer, or are we collecting questions, Irina?
Yes, please go ahead and answer.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Thank you for that question, Dale. It's a very important question, but as you know, that for most universities in Africa and the Global South, we've really tended to want to do things as they are done in the West. And we are motivated by performing according to international standards. And the University of Lesotho has that criteria that it has listed, and it speaks to publishing in high impact journals, publishing in peer-reviewed journals. It is standard, and it is what all universities aspire to. But it's increasingly, people that we call activist academics are beginning to question this criteria, that we are developing research that is changing the way solar is used in Lesotho. We're developing research that is changing the way energy is consumed, where water is, sanitation is managed. And we don't have time to publish, but we're changing lives. And so the university has begun to think we should be looking at other ways of recognizing research than just publication in high impact journals. So what is on paper is still the old criteria, but that old criteria is beginning to be questioned in terms of its adequacy, in terms of its relevance, and in terms of its supremacy, so that we have to think about other models and other ways. And Dora, in some sense, speaks to that. And I hope, Stephen, you'll share the full module for those who haven't seen it. Module 4, for me, excites me because it speaks to the things that we are concerned about at University of Lesotho right now. As university librarian, my role, Theo, let me say I'm a university librarian, but also I've been active in open access and open science for many years. And have always looked for other more egalitarian, more progressive ways of publishing that bring more people on board. So I'm embracing Dora from the point of view that it brings change to the traditional way of doing research that puts people under pressure, but also ignores the things that are important for developmental states like ours and many countries of the South. I hope that answers your question. Maybe Stephen could add.
Yes, very briefly. I mean, I agree with everything that you said, Buhle, and I do appreciate. And one of the things that I think Dora has tried to emphasize, and I certainly say it when I am talking, is about recognizing the value of research that goes beyond publications. For far too long, we've had too much emphasis that the academic paper is the thing that we consider worthy of gold stars, and we don't think enough about the other activities that many academics get involved in. I do see a bit of a change in the landscape, and I think obviously the pandemic and the way that the scientific community has responded to the pandemic, particularly by then a huge increase in the number of preprints that are used to share research results immediately. And we saw there was an initiative led by the Wellcome Trust back in 2016, when there was the sort of Zika virus health crisis spreading across South America. There was an agreement to temporarily suspend the way that we normally publish and to allow people to share data immediately so that the community could, analyze the problem of the link between virus infection and microcephaly. And in those cases, to me, that really shows you that our normal practice of publishing, which is very slow, which is slowed down because people chase after high impact factor journals, that practice works against the public interest. And I think if more members of the public knew that that's what academics were doing, and academics, they are acting rationally, but they're acting selfishly and rationally in that practice. But if more members of the public knew that that was happening, they would be absolutely outraged. But there is tremendous idealism, I think, and willingness to do good within the academic community, and we've seen that in the COVID pandemic. And so the sharing of information has helped with vaccine development, with understanding not just the scientific but the social science issues dealing with sharing of information and overcoming vaccine hesitancy. And so there's so many benefits. But surely the lesson from that is that, well, if we change back to our old mode, why would we want to do that? And so, I'm personally very keen on using preprints as a cheap way to share data. I recognize that many people still want peer review, and there will be costs associated with that, but also recognize the issues of the rise of the APC model in open access publishing. And there are, of course, good alternatives to that. The SciELO initiative in South America is obviously institution-led and represents very good value for money. But I know, talking to South American colleagues, that they nevertheless still come under pressure to publish in international journals, because that's what gets the universities into the university league tables. And so the whole system is geared towards protecting what is the hegemony of established publishers who they can basically make up how much money they want to charge. If you want to publish in Nature now, open access, it's 10,000 euros. You know, it's an incredible price. You know, there's far better ways to spend that money. I would imagine most researchers would think than, you know, paying publisher fees that are basically made up. So, and, you know, one of the things, I mean, one of the reasons I got into Dora was actually through debates on open access. And it's because we still place too much of a premium on where things are published when it comes to research assessment. And we have to change that practice. And so Dora is very much trying to emphasize the value on it's the research. And it isn't just the paper, you're quite right. It's, you know, research that changes people's lives, either locally or internationally, you know, that should be recognized because that's a very valuable activity. There is, of course, a great deal of resistance to the status quo from those that benefit from the status quo, but we simply have to keep fighting. And that's why Dora was very keen to make sure that we had an international advisory board, so that, and it has been extremely valuable to us to hear voices, because traditionally, and our steering group is still very much dominated by Europeans and North Americans, but we're actually in the process of changing our governance. So we're actually going to merge. The plan is, it's not yet approved, but the plan is to merge the two groups so that we just have one steering committee, and that it's a global steering committee and has represents from all over the world, because this is a global issue.
Please, Theodosia. I think you have to unmute yourself.
I have a follow-up question, and that this time is to Stephen. The reason why I'm really passionate about this, because I see researchers here who are discouraged, frustrated. One, because they've done their research, they want to publish it, but then the APCs are prohibitive. That's one. And I'm wondering what Dora can do to help with that. I mean, in the long term, short term, because it is an issue. So although they want to publish their research, this is a big challenge. It's true that there are journals that waiver some of these, but probably the journals they want to publish in don't have those waivers, or those disciplines are not represented. And another question I'd like to ask is, I don't know how much information we in Africa have about Dora and the changing climate in research assessment and so on. And I'm wondering if there could be some representatives from Africa on your board, so that this message is louder and clearer in Africa. So these are some of the questions I'd like us to address. Thank you.
Okay, so I do appreciate the problem of APCs. I don't think ideally the solution is that people have to ask for waivers or for special treatment because of socioeconomic conditions of their country. What ideally we need is a system that offers value for money and that is not prohibitively expensive. And in South America, as I mentioned, with the SAILO initiative, they have made important strides there. As many of you will have heard, so there is a European plan, Plan S, which is aiming to sort of accelerate the uptake of open access. It has had a mixed reception, I would say, from some. I think it's an ambitious and a bold plan. And one of the good things about it is that they recognize that the change cannot come without a simultaneous change in practices around research assessment. And so they have made the uptake of Dora-like principles one of the sort of key pillars of Plan S. Now, many people have interpreted Plan S to be a plan that is pushing the APC model of open access, but in fact, it doesn't do that. It may have that impact in some countries, I think that's true because of the current practices, but they have also, as part of the plan, ambitions to develop alternative models. And so one example of that is the Open Library of Humanities, which is a kind of membership model. So they ask university libraries from around the world to pay a small subscription, and then that means that they don't have to charge APCs. So if you have a journal that's hosted by the Open Library of Humanities, then it's free to authors and it's free to readers, but it relies on a membership model. And so that's one possible alternative way that one can do that. But I think we need a bit more government support. I mean, I see information a little bit like as a utility in the same way as roads, you know. So in most countries, roads are paid for through taxation and they are free to use. And I think the information superhighway in that sense, particularly because most research is actually a public good and is paid for by governments or by charities and should be treated in the same way. And so that pricing perhaps could be regulated in some way. But that, you know, there are economic and political problems around there. In terms of Voices from Africa, then, well, as I said, we do have a global advisory board and we do have representation from Africa on that. But of course, the board is not massive. And so we aim for 3 representatives from each continent. But of course, 3 people representing the whole of Africa is very far from, you know, covering the whole of the interest from Africa. But that is something that we can certainly work on. And as I said, we were hoping that the GRC meeting last year would have been held in South Africa, and that would have brought a bit more African attention to things that are going on. But I would encourage people to contact our African representatives if there are issues that they want Dora to address, and that then would be a way to feed into our thinking around, you know, what our priorities could be for the years to come.
Thank you. And Najar Al-Khatib wrote in the chat how much they charge for publication. Most journals with good credibility charge high amounts for publishing research. Some of us cannot afford that. And I think that's exactly what Dora is trying to change. And also other similar initiatives saying that it doesn't really matter in which journal you publish, as long as it's quality, peer-reviewed, good journal. It doesn't need to be top journal, prestige journal. It's important that it's a journal that you and your colleagues read. And Buhle mentioned that South African government recognizes all journals listed in the Directory of Open Access Journals as credible journals. And I think that's a move that other institutions and countries could follow and use DOAJ as journal quality criteria list. And over there are 11,677 journals that don't charge article processing charges.
I mean, it's true that there are many journals that either don't charge APCs or you know, are very cheap. But I think the questioner in the chat is right that, you know, many of the journals that people want to publish in, because they are seen as the best venues, you know, it is a seller's market, shall we say, and that's because of the long-standing recognition that there's no real competition between journals, and that's what gives them, you know, ultimate sort of economic power in the marketplace. And so I think we do need, again, recognizing that, you know, the vast majority of research that is done and is funded through public money and is seen as a public good. And I think governments need to pay more attention to making sure that within the research is covered the cost of disseminating that research. And
rights retention is another strategy that Coalition S advocates for, where a researcher could choose to publish in any journal she wants, but make sure that a peer-reviewed version of that article is immediately openly available in a repository under Creative Commons attribution license. So that could be a way for those who still want to go for prestige journals.
It could be, but I think some journals are charging for that privilege, you know. So if you want to put a CC BY license on it, there's a fee. And so clearly, again, that's an exercise of their power. So there is still some way to travel, I think, down that road.
And I think that there is I see our time is running out. We do need to also raise the level of awareness of the what is now emerging as people charging for publication, what is calling predatory journals, and that the researchers are made aware so that they're not charged a lot of money by journals that are indeed pirates, but also that that they think very carefully about what they're going to do with their rights, and that there are journals that will accept them for publication on the merit of their journal. They don't have to give their rights away. So that training of researchers is also a very crucial step that we need to be doing in our institutions.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. For many years myself, I just signed the copyright transfer form, and I didn't even read it. I just thought, it's a piece of paper. I need to get it out of the way. I want my paper published. And I had no idea how much I was giving away in that process. So I think some education of our learned colleagues is definitely in order.
Thanks a lot, Buhle. Thanks a lot, Stephen. Thank you, Theo, for your questions, and also Najar.
Thank you.
Let me stop the recording.
Thank you.